Welcome to the Shudder. This is a collection of roadside Bigfoot sightings and encounters. I searched through the many that are out there and settled on these that I think you'll enjoy and maybe discover a little something about the behavior of some of these creatures when seen by or near roads. Okay, slide that high back chair you stand in to change light bulbs out of the corner and settle in. At around 6:45 p.m. on April 23, 2008, as my son and I were coming into the U.S. from Canada, we were traveling west about 14 miles on the U.S. side of the border on the Alkin Highway. My son was driving. If you've ever driven that road, then you know how the pavement has huge dips in it. I suspect from the freezing and thawing of the foundation of soil under the pavement. Anyway, my son was watching directly in front of the car to make sure we took the smoothest path around some upcoming heaves in the pavement. I was watching further down the highway as I had done our entire trip. My hope was to catch a glimpse of a bear, moose, or some awesome wildlife of some kind. We were on a slight descent down a hill, making a slight left corner and about to start up the other side when I saw what I thought was a man crossing the road about 3/10 of a mile ahead of us and up a slight incline. He was a tall, odd-looking fellow, and I joked to myself when I first saw him, well, there's a Sasquatch up the road, fully expecting to see that a person had crossed from a house or something on the left side of the road over to another house or something on the right. When we got to the point where the structure should have been, there was nothing. I mean nothing, and no sign of any human, animal, or anything else on the right-hand side of the road in the woods. This thing was walking upright like a man, long arms, and what looked like a long neck from the side. It had a fairly long gape in its walk, arms swinging with each stride. It was all one color. I described it to my wife as the color of Carhartt rust brown full coveralls. I called her first thing when we got cell coverage, and she got on the web and saw where this was not the first time a sighting happened in this very same area. I was so glad that someone else had seen it. I hate to say it, but he looked similar to the representations you see on TV and pictures. By the way, I've always thought this whole thing was a bunch of nonsense. If it wasn't the real thing, then someone was wearing a suit to make them look like a Sasquatch. It was the month of July 2009 in Fairbanks, Alaska. I was heading south on Auburn Drive toward Farmers Loop, which is about 1 mile away. It is a wooded area with a lot of homes and in general would be considered a populated area. Houses are on an average about 100 to 200 feet apart, with only the general area around and close to the homes cleared out. Most of the area by far is wooded. It was the section of road where it passes by Pearl Creek Elementary School. The school can be seen through the woods. Some of the woods in the area are quite thick and in some places can't be seen into more than 10 or 15 feet. But in this area, it had apparently been cleaned out quite a bit, and sight lines into the section of the sighting were very open. The school and a vegetable garden could be seen off to the right from the road I was on. It was about 6 p.m., and I was heading home after a day of working on a deck I was building. The weather was clear, with the sun high in the sky. As I was driving, I happened to notice a man standing by the right side of the road about 100 yards ahead. It was more of an unconscious recognition. There's nothing unusual about a man standing on the side of the road in this area. As I got to within about 50 yards, I looked closer. That's no man, I thought to myself. Shortly after that, 1 or 2 seconds, he bolted into the woods toward the school. He did it like a wild animal would do if spooked. I didn't slow down until I got to the place where I saw him go into the woods, which is where I stopped. I could see him running away from the road, and when he was into the woods about 30 yards or so, he turned left and was now running parallel to the road in the same direction I was heading. I got a good look at him, but not his face. I could have probably seen his face had I not been so mesmerized and had the presence of mind to look at it. His fur or hair looked to be about 3 or 4 inches all over the main part of his body. It was a reddish, rusty color. I was mildly struck by how red it was, but it definitely had some rustiness to it. He was about 6 feet tall and looked to weigh about 200 pounds. He ran with a strange, hoppy kind of run. One foot he pushed off with was more of a normal running move, but the other foot he pushed off with propelled him upward about a foot or less and forward. I watched him until he disappeared into the woods. There was a road about 100 yards ahead, and I took off to get to it so I could turn right, then, in 20 yards, turn right again to the road that led to the school parking lot. The wooded area he was in was sort of a peninsula, and he had to be in there somewhere. The woods I was looking into from that angle were quite thick, and I didn't see him and haven't seen him since. A little further up on the right was the school garden that had people in it, around 7 or 10, which I'm now sorry I didn't stop to go talk to then about it. The next day, I was driving in to work on the deck. I naturally slowed down in the area I saw him and was surveying the area when a couple walking their dogs were approaching. I flagged them down and told the story of what happened the evening before, and they told me that about a week before they were walking with their dogs and were on the other side of the school property by the soccer field. 3 kids came running over to them saying, "Did you see the Sasquatch?" They also said what appeared to be a dad was with them who didn't seem too excited about it. My conclusion to whether it was real or not is summed up by saying it was either real or there was a man in a very, very convincing costume. I have been reluctant to share my story because of my field of work and do not want to have people think I'm crazy, as this could damage my career. But as I get older, I feel this incident needs to be documented. The incident occurred in the winter of 1980, a few miles east of Clayton, Alabama, in Barber County. I was traveling with my aunt, grandmother, and 4 younger cousins to a relative's house. It was dark and probably around 9 p.m. from the best I can remember. For some reason, my aunt needed to turn around and proceeded to pull off the road by a small clearing. I was in the front seat of the car with my aunt, who was driving, and my grandmother. As we turned off the road, the headlights caught a figure in mid-stride. It then immediately froze and did not move anymore. It was about 30 yards from the car, very close. I could see the entire side view of this creature, and its body was slightly turned so that it was looking at us. The most terrifying thing in my memory is this thing's huge eyes glaring at us. The best way I can describe the creature's expression is stunned. The face was covered in hair except for around the eyes. The hair was dark and appeared longer and wavy looking on the arms and legs. It was very tall and massive, yet lean looking. I would say it was easily over 7 feet tall, if not more. When it froze in the headlights, one arm was slightly extended behind the creature, and it held this position. At this point, my grandmother was crying and begging my aunt to drive away. 2 of my younger cousins were huddled on the floorboard in the back seat crying. I was terrified, but could not look away. My aunt kept telling my grandmother, "There's no way he can get in this car," and she kept the car still, and we watched this motionless creature for 2 or 3 minutes. It was almost completely motionless. It was as if the creature thought we could not see him if he didn't move. I don't know how it stood so still. The hair on my neck is standing on end as I type this. It scared me terribly. He kept staring at us with his eyes stretched very wide. I'll never forget that look he gave us. Finally, my aunt decided to flash the lights on and off real quick. The instant she did this, the creature jumped toward the woods and was gone. He was about 10 yards from the woods, but made it there in less than a second. I couldn't believe how fast this huge creature could move. This event traumatized me. I have never been able to go into the woods alone or enjoy camping since this event. I tried to deer hunt, but could not enjoy it and quit. I can't sit alone in a tree stand without thinking of this creature and becoming tense. I can't imagine coming up on this thing alone in the wilderness. I know these creatures exist. There is no doubt in my mind I saw one up close and personal. My son and I had just left the park early one morning. I was driving and my son was in the passenger seat. We departed the park via Route 9, headed north a short distance on Route 1, and picked up Route 404 west. There was very little traffic on the secondary road at this time of morning, so I drove with my high beams on and set the cruise control. Within a few minutes, I saw movement along the right side of the road, about 100 yards ahead, and began braking. A doe stepped onto the berm of the road and crossed from right to left. I continued braking, almost to a complete stop, in case more deer followed the doe, but she apparently was alone. Another few minutes passed before we saw another car approaching from the opposite direction. We could see its headlights glow before we could see the car itself, because we were approaching a gentle curve in the road to the right. I flicked my headlights to low beam, and in a matter of a few seconds saw the silhouette of a large biped cross the road from the center part across our lane of travel and enter the woods to our right some 100 feet ahead. My son immediately yelled out, "What the heck was that?" I said, "You saw it too?" And he said, "Yes, there were 2 of them." "2?" I asked, and he said, "Yes, a tall one in front and a shorter one 4 or 5 feet behind." My truck has almost slowed to a complete stop by this time because my foot was on the brake as soon as I first spotted the creature. We slowly drove by the spot where they appeared to enter the woods, but we couldn't see anything. The car that was approaching passed us at this point without slowing down or stopping. I asked my son to describe what he saw. He said a large thing walking on 2 legs, with another shorter thing following behind it. He added that the shorter one was about chest high on the larger one. My son is 6 feet tall, and he said the larger one was taller than him. I saw the taller one side profile as a silhouette, almost a shadow. It moved across the road quickly in a purposeful manner. I could see no arms or arm swing, and it didn't turn its head to look toward us. I could discern no color or body features beyond a head, torso, and legs. There was no accompanying odor. When we passed what we believed to be the creature's entry point into the woods, my son's passenger side window was completely down, and mine was partially down. A normal moist, woodsy nighttime odor was all we noticed. We drove on in silent disbelief, and have yet to see anything like that again. This incident occurred in the latter part of 1983, September, I believe, just outside of Richmond, Kentucky, in Waco. I was about 12 years old and was out riding my bike when I decided to go visit a friend. He lived about a quarter mile off the main highway at the end of a gravel road. His house was the only one on the road and was completely surrounded by thick woods. After arriving, I walked to the door and realized nobody was home. As I returned to my bike, I heard a loud crash from the side of the house. I quickly looked and saw a large black figure tearing a huge limb from a tree. The figure was at least 8 feet tall and covered in thick black hair. I couldn't guess the weight, but it was big. The figure was standing upright and was looking right at me. It was definitely not a bear. I quickly jumped on my bike and pedaled as fast as I could toward the main road. The ride back to the main road seemed to take forever, and the entire distance back I could hear branches breaking and what appeared to be heavy footsteps running alongside me. I was terrified. I thought for sure I was about to be attacked. When I hit the main road, it stopped. I kept riding, but couldn't help but wonder why whatever it was stopped chasing me once I hit the road. I don't know what it was, but I do know if it were a bear, it wouldn't have stopped. And it was fast because it was able to catch a terrified kid pedaling his legs off. My wife and I were traveling south on Scenic Highway 7 north of Bovey, Minnesota. It was Sunday, 2 weeks before Labor Day in 2009. We had been swimming at our lakeshore property and my wife offered to drive home. I was in the passenger seat and noticed what I thought was a man in the ditch ahead of us. We were about 200 yards from this person when I noticed an animal-type movement of its upper body. I have hunted in northern Minnesota my entire life and thought this was really strange that this person could react with such speed. Suddenly, the creature made a movement to the woods, but just as fast decided to cross the road. I alerted my wife to slow down to not hit this person. As she slowed, this creature crossed less than 20 feet in front of us. It was covered in dark brown fur and was about 7 feet tall. It had a broad nose with little hair on its forehead or cheeks. Its feet were covered with long hair like a Clydesdale horse that trailed on the pavement as it crossed. Its chest had welts all over it that I reasoned were from insect bites. It had long muscular arms, and when it reached the other side of the road, it swung its arms and leaped the entire ditchway. It was so far outside the human norm that my wife asked if it was a werewolf. I am very well trained when it comes to wildlife and would never have believed what I saw. Seeing is believing. There's no possible way this could have been a human in a suit. Since seeing this creature, there's no doubt in my mind that Bigfoot does exist. It's been a week now. I was driving home through the mountains from a concert on Route 8 in Hamilton County, New York. It was a relatively clear night, and I wasn't tired at all. At around 12:30 a.m., I hit a creature that was carrying a deer with my car. My car was damaged from the hood to the rear by this creature, and I know it is at least injured and its DNA may still be on my car. The speed limit was 55, and I was not able to stop in time. When I saw the creature, who was carrying a deer, about to step onto the roadway, I hit the brakes, but was only able to slow down minimally before impact. I did not really believe in Bigfoot before then, and I'm still shaken up and have not been able to share this story with anyone. I wanted to stop and see if the creature was okay, but I was too scared to stop and get out of the car. The creature was huge, at least 8 feet tall. I've seen drawings and such of Bigfoot, and this creature looked similar. It had white around its hairline, and its fur was dark brown, almost black. I'm shaking writing this, and I'm in such disbelief that this happened to me. I can't even report the accident to the police, and I don't know what I will tell my insurance company. My car is badly damaged. The creature crushed my windshield wipers together, broke many pieces off the passenger side, and left smears of dirt and blood all over the rear window. My friend John and a buddy had gone out drinking, but he said they were not drunk. He was driving his friend home, and in his words, his friend lived way out on a ridge in the middle of nowhere. Apparently, they had to drive for a ways down lonely dirt roads with pretty thick forest on either side. It was mid-November and quite cold, in the 30s. They were driving down a back road when they came around a bend which straightened out for a ways. They were astonished to see what appeared to be a naked man jogging along the road on the passenger side, going in the same direction as their car. He was approximately 100 yards ahead, jogging slightly hunched, and they noticed his arms seemed unusually long for his height. They looked at each other and thought he might have been the victim of some accident or crime, because in their opinion, no one in their right mind would be jogging naked in the Pennsylvania woods in the middle of November. They approached the man and slowed down. John's friend rolled down his window and yelled out, "Hey man, you need some help?" To his surprise, the guy didn't slow down, but just kept jogging. So John pulled the car up level with him, and just as his friend was about to ask again if he needed any help, he looked in the window. At this point, John got a real funny look on his face. I could see him visualizing what he had seen. I asked, "Well, did he answer?" And John said, "He didn't have a face." When I asked him what he meant by that, he said, "Well, he had a face, but it was real flat, and he had eyes, but his nose was real small, and so was his mouth." He also mentioned that the creature never stopped jogging while he was looking in the window, nor did it make any noise. He said it was covered with light brown or beige hair all over, about an inch or two long. The guy screamed, and John's foot put the pedal to the metal. He said he looked in the rearview mirror as they left precipitously, and the creature was still loping along by the side of the road. Needless to say, he stayed at his friend's place that night because he said he couldn't imagine driving back down that road again by himself that night. In August of 2006, my wife and I were camping in the mountains of northern Idaho. We drove my 4x4 pickup to the ridgeline that divides the St. Joe River and North Fork Clearwater River. This is accessible by USFS and BLM roads, the latter of which is generally open June to September due to the high elevation and snow. The weather at this time was favorable, and we chose to sleep in the back of the truck rather than using the tent. We both felt very uneasy after laying in bed for at least an hour. This uneasiness is difficult to describe, but we both felt very strange and decided to start the truck and go back down the mountain. The night was clear under a full moon. We were easily able to see the trail without headlights and drove slowly downhill. After only 5 or so minutes of travel, we rounded a bend in the trail and saw something large ahead of us. I flipped on the headlights, and a very large creature jumped off the trail and into the woods, moving downhill to our left. We caught only the briefest glimpse, but the creature was easily 9 or 10 feet tall and covered in brown fur. As the creature jumped from the trail, it seemed to catch a fir tree, which obscured it from our direct line of sight. The tree was about 12 to 14 feet tall, and bent tip to ground before springing back up. This all occurred in a matter of seconds. We both said, "What the heck is that?" I hit the e-brake and got out of the cab with my mag light and my 30-30. shining the light through the trees illuminated at least 50 yards clearly, as the alpine forest is not very dense except for the huckleberry bushes, knee to waist high. I saw nothing and heard nothing. I couldn't figure how any animal so large could get out of sight so quickly with no sound, no twig snapping beyond the flashlight or anything. That's when all the hair on my arms and neck stood straight on end. I realized that the creature was laying down in the huckleberry bushes right in front of me. I can't explain, as it wasn't visible, but I simply knew it was right there. I had the distinct impression that this thing was waiting for me to make the next move. My wife was still in the truck, begging me to get back in and leave. She was terrified. Somehow, my 30-30 seemed suddenly impotent. My fear overpowered my curiosity, and I got back in the truck and we got away from that area. I have been around moose and bears many times in the woods over the years, and never felt frightened, but this night I was scared for sure. The hair on my arms and neck stands on end now writing this nearly 12 years later. I do not believe that creature was a moose or a bear. I can't help thinking that if we hadn't left our camping spot due to our intense feelings of uneasiness and had instead fallen asleep there, that we would have had a much different experience with the creature. My mom and I were driving home to Interlochen from a friend's house. It was late afternoon, and my mom was driving the car. It was quiet, and we were talking. As my mom was driving down the dirt road through the woods, we came to a clearing on the right side. No trees, just tall weeds. I remember the weeds were not green. They were a light brown. On the far side of the field, I noticed an extremely large rock, more like a boulder. It must have caught my eye because it was the only thing of any height or color in the field. It was probably 3 feet tall and dark gray in color. There was nothing special about it. The only reason I even noticed it was because it was large, dark, and stuck out in this empty, colorless, flat field. Suddenly, several large dogs appeared on the opposite side of the road. 2 or 3 trotted out across the road in front of us. Mom quickly stopped the car. They seemed to take no notice of us at all and continued to trot across the field on our right. They were not running, but they were moving with a purpose. 3 more dogs emerged on the left and a little more cautiously crossed the road in front of us. They did take notice of us, but as soon as they crossed the road, they too began to trot across the field. Mom remained stopped, and we watched the dogs. I don't remember what they all looked like, but I do remember they were all large dogs, maybe 75 to 80 pounds, and some of them looked like German shepherds. They were all trotting across the field and in the direction of the large rock. Suddenly, the rock stood up. Strange, it stood up slowly and gracefully. As soon as it did, the dogs began to run towards it, not as if to attack it, but as a dog would run towards someone he knew to greet him. My very first thought was that a man had been out with his dogs and was somehow calling them to him. I thought a man because it looked like a very large man in a snowmobile suit with his hood up. A snowmobile suit because his body was not defined the way a person's body would be. There was no separation between his shoulders and his neck, kind of the way it looks when someone wears a jacket with a hood. It was as if my mind was trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but then I actually saw what I was looking at. It could not have been a man. It was very tall, probably 2 feet taller than an average man. I'm guessing it must have been at least 8 feet. And there was no reason for a man to be wearing a snowmobile suit. The day was much too warm. He was all dark gray in color with no body definition. His arms were also longer than a man's. His hands hung down by his knees. By this time, the dogs were all with him and excitedly running around and jumping. I remember thinking that the dogs were obviously with him. I also remember thinking that he must have called or whistled to the dogs. I don't actually remember having my window down, but I must have, because I remember thinking that if he had called or whistled, I would have heard it. He then began to walk into the woods and moved oddly, not the way a man would walk. He had very large strides, and his legs were bent like someone running, but he was walking. It was similar to watching someone run in slow motion, and his arms swung back and forth in exaggerated motions. He moved into the woods very quickly, but just seemed to calmly walk away. He had been right on the edge of the woods, so we were not able to watch for very long before he and all the dogs disappeared into the trees. I remember just staring at the spot in the woods while my mom began to drive away. I felt like I was in shock, like I had just seen something that I could not have possibly seen. I just sat quietly and looked out the window. I looked at my mom a couple of times, and she was just staring straight ahead as she drove. We never said a word to each other. Once we got home, we walked into the kitchen, looked at each other, and just started crying. We didn't talk about what we had just seen. The only thing either of us kept saying was that we could never tell anyone what we had just seen. Since then, we have told a few people, but I honestly don't think they believed us. I feel like they believed we saw something, but maybe it was unexplainable and we have exaggerated the story or something. Mom and I actually went back to find the location for the first time since that summer. We began driving down the dirt road, and even after more than 20 years, we had no trouble finding the location. We rounded a curve, and there was the field on our right. And even though over 20 years have passed, we both rolled our windows up and locked our doors. I was headed home from work, traveling my regular route at about 45 miles an hour, headed north on Highway 7, Edson, Tennessee. I was still in Hawkins County when suddenly something came from nowhere right in front of me in the road, headed west. If you're at all familiar with the highways and roads of East Tennessee, you will know that it is not uncommon for the roads to be narrow, without guardrails or shoulders, and straight down on one side and straight up on the other. The point is, there is nowhere to pull over or off the road sometimes for miles. This was the situation here. When this thing appeared in front of my car, my reflex was to hit the brakes and avoid it. I had no options but to skid to a halt in the middle of my lane. At the precise moment, a vehicle was approaching from the opposite direction. It is also not uncommon to have your bright lights on and have to dim them quickly as the roads curve quickly and without warning of an oncoming vehicle. When the driver of the other vehicle saw me and I him, we both had our high beams on, which totally illuminated the subject in question from both sides. I was able to get a very good look at it. I brought my car to a screeching stop, leaving tire marks on the road and causing my briefcase to fly off the front passenger seat to the floor. The other vehicle hit his brakes also and came to an easier stop right across from my driver's side window. We both put our windows down and just looked at each other for a few seconds. I asked, "Did you see what I saw?" His response was, "What did you see?" This is the description I gave him. It was a creature with a human-like form, as of a large man running. I estimated it to be taller than me, making it maybe 6'6" or more. I am 6 foot. It was totally black and appeared to be covered with black hair. I say hair and not fur, because with the illumination of headlights from both directions, I could see through the hair as if it were being blown by the wind. The creature was in a dead run, so apparently the hair was affected by the force of the air as it ran. The hair gave the appearance of being about 3 or 4 inches in length. I did not see a face. Either it was turned from me, or the skin and hairs were so black I could not distinguish features. The other driver concurred with me on the description. The other driver's vehicle also had 2 passengers. They all witnessed it as well and concurred on the description. The driver asked me, how many legs was it running on? I immediately responded, 2. At that time, the passenger in his vehicle gave a little slug on the driver's arm and said, I told you 2 legs. We both decided to turn our vehicles to aim our lights up the steep embankment to see if we could see anything, but with no success. At that time, another vehicle was approaching, and since we were now blocking the entire narrow passage, we had to straighten our vehicles and get moving. I proceeded home. Knowing that one of our maintenance men lived in the same general proximity of the sighting, I was anxious to share my story with him. I began my tale with, Jim, you'll never believe what I saw last night. As I began to tell my story, he interrupted me and started to tell me that it sounded similar to the story his father-in-law told him last night. I asked Jim to tell me what his father-in-law told him, and he was telling me information that only the driver and passengers of the other vehicle and myself would know, since we were the only ones there. Synchronicity? I think so. What are the chances of me working with a relative of the person that encountered the same thing as I? Jim told me that his father-in-law told him that when he stopped opposite my car and looked at me, he said my eyes were as big as saucers, and I had the look of total surprise on my face. Jim was able to recall the conversation I had with his father-in-law, which verified to me that he indeed was the driver of the other vehicle. During our conversation, the dietary manager, Jackie, heard us talking and stopped to listen. Then, when there was a break in the conversation, she interjected, Bigfoot. I looked at her and said, now don't start. She, being a native of the area, informed us that for years there have been reports of a similar nature in that same area, often being referred to as Bigfoot. I have yet to research this information. About 20 minutes after news of our discussion had circulated throughout the facility, a CNA, Betty, came to my office and told me of her experience earlier that night. Betty told me that around 5 p.m., she and her husband, who lived about 5 miles further down the nearby road from the sighting, had noticed what they thought was a man in the distance on their property, apparently trying to access to one of their outbuildings. Betty's husband, Bob, went in the house and retrieved a rifle and let off a warning shot to ward off the would-be intruder. The trespasser fled in a run into the woods. Betty and Bob went down to the area the trespasser was, but found nothing out of order. However, noticed some very strange footprints in the slightly damp ground. Betty described the prints as being approximately 5 to 6 inches in diameter and sort of round. She said it was like the ball of the foot that had hit the ground running. Strangely enough, the foot was bare and had the imprint of 6 toes. What further puzzled both Betty and Bob was that there were obviously only 2 feet. The same 2 prints repeated several times. This is all the information I have at this time. I don't know what conclusions to make from all this, but I find it very interesting that we all have several collaborating stories that offer different information about a similar encounter happening in the same location and time frame. What do you think? What do I think? I think y'all saw Bigfoot myself. But hey, I hope you enjoyed those roadside Bigfoot accounts. If you really pay attention, there's a lot to be learned about Sasquatch behavior in these stories. At least I found it that way myself. I want to thank you all for listening and consider hitting that like button. You know, I've heard you get 1 year of good luck when you hit the like button. Just saying. But really, thanks for listening, and if you subscribe, make make sure you hit that notification bell so you can join me here next time for the Shudder.